Welcome to the Charles Aris Podcast. My name is Greg Harper. I am the Senior Vice President of our Engineering and Operations practice, and I focus mainly on industrials in plastics, packaging, paper, and all things engineering and manufacturing related. And today I'm privileged to have our practice leader that works closely with me in our practice, Jesse Warnke. And we're going to talk about sustainability, mainly in the packaging industry today. And so without further ado, I want to throw it over to Jesse and let him tell you a little bit about himself.
As Greg mentioned, I'm one of the newest practice leaders here at Charles Aris Executive Search. Very similar to Greg, a strong back-end focus on the operations and engineering side. I actually bring 20 years of industry experience, progressive growth and operations leadership roles, responsibility for developing and building both operations teams, engineering leadership teams. Coming into the firm, I would say, a few months ago, really the goal was to focus on the plastics and packaging space. That's where I have some of my history and a deep appreciation, I guess I would say, knowing the type of products, the type of clients, and the challenges that face that industry. And so I'm excited, Greg, to spend some time with you and talk about sustainability and what I think it means to me and also what I think it means to the industry. And so I think we both know it doesn't necessarily need to be a hurdle, but a lot of times it feels like an elephant. And it's like, how do you go about this and what does it mean? So look forward to
Jesse,
unpacking it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Sustainability can, to some is kind of viewed as that taboo word, especially by those that are ignorant to it and truly don't understand what sustainability is and means. So why don't we start with that? Let's just talk about, defining sustainability and what does it actually really mean beyond the kind of the corporate jargon.
Yeah, I'll give my thoughts on it and then feel free to add in where you have, kind of from your history, Greg. I think we, like many topics, it becomes an overused term. It's the right term, but we use it at such a generic high level that it just becomes this huge gargantuan project and undertaking. And a lot of times it can feel like a burden or an anchor. It can feel like, hey, there's this big thing. The whole world wants sustainability and we have to go do it only because somebody else wants us to. In reality, I think there's a lot of internal benefits to an organization that chooses to kind of go after this. And really, when you think about what it is, there's an environmental component, there's a social component, there's an economic component. And ideally, when you go down this path, I think you get some credibility with your team members that are working within the organization. I think you get a lot of credibility in the market. But at the end of the day, if you do it right, I think you can actually bring some economic benefits to the organization as well. So again, it could be a holistic approach. When I think about what does it mean, at the end of the day, it just means the impact that you're having from a global economic perspective, from a natural resources, is you're ideally trying to whittle down the impact that you have, the lasting impact that you have. That can be in the terms of energy use. It could be in the terms of raw materials like wood use, or it could be in the synthetic materials and just reducing the amount that you're putting kind of back into the earth. At the end of the day, I think what it really means is if you kind of look at your life cycle assessment, the products that you have, in conjunction probably with the facility to make those products, understanding where you can kind of attack to reduce the impact that you have. And again, it can be small or it can be big. And we'll kind of unpack a little bit of this during this time and share some examples, I guess, from my past, as well as maybe some areas that we can kind of get started, or people can get started if they've never gone after this.
I appreciate those comments, Jesse. Yeah, I think one thing about it is, people hear the word sustainability, they get a little bit intimidated. But let's talk about, a company or even an individual from that perspective that decides that they want to embrace sustainability and want to adopt it, so to speak, in their business practice. What might you think are some of the biggest roadblocks that would prevent a company or discourage a company from adopting sustainability practices in a more aggressive manner?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll start kind of from an individual concept, and then we can talk about from a corporate side. So I think everybody's super familiar with the idea of sustainability in your whole life, right? We all have recycling bins at this point. Everybody has the water faucets that use less water, the low volume toilets have kind of made their way into the homes. And we don't think about it anymore. It's become just kind of natural part of life. That same concept really, I think, comes into the industrial side and the commercial side from a company. And so in that same way, I think the number one probably challenge of companies undertaking this is if you undertake it in the sense of, I need to tell my customer that I'm doing all these amazing things, and I'm going to reference Apple, right? They made a pretty significant commitment to be carbon zero in the future, right? And to do that as a company like Apple is a gargantuan effort. And it feels like, wow, that's it for the regular company. I would say that feels like a distraction to just trying to grow your top line, your bottom line, and ensure your customers are happy on a product level, much less the sustainability that feels like a philanthropic aspect. But it doesn't have to be that. Again, in the same way in your personal life and in your home where you make small changes, the companies can do the same thing. And so I think if a company says, hey, I'm just going to start in one particular area, and then I'm going to build on that and get a win, get a small win. And I'll give you a couple examples of where I've seen this done. And again, I think before I get into that, I think the other thing is if you're doing this from a purely commercial perspective, purely to satisfy a government requirement, a regulatory requirement of some sort, or you're doing it because your customer demands it, that might be necessary, but that shouldn't be the primary reason that you undertake it. Because again, I think there could be economic benefits from going about this. But an example, it could be as easy as putting timers on lights in your building or the light switches that sense motion so that when somebody's not in the facility and people are walking out for the weekend or the evening, the lights are automatically turning off. That is a very small investment for just a natural payback that we would expect to see. Most new buildings already have that in place. But again, that's just a small example. You can go as extreme as saying we're going to completely change the materials that we use, or we're going to completely swap out a particular raw material component. And you might think, well, that requires a really heavy lift from the R&D to understanding the product performance side, not just getting the process to work, but the product performance side in the market, and then how that kind of over the next 15 years, the product might perform out in the field. When you've had an established product line, and you've been making and supplying this to your customer for the last, 20 years, and it's working, and you've just spent 20 years of working out the kinks in your product performance, frankly, the last thing you want to do is change that and add complexity. And so I think that's the reason that a lot of people try to avoid it. But you don't always have to go after the product lifecycle side in your company. You could start with the infrastructure. And then once you start becoming more and more comfortable, you can move into the product.
Excellent. And I think you made a good point, Jesse, that a lot of companies and even individuals think that you've got to jump in the deep end right off the bat with sustainability. And that's not the case. You can create small wins that then get the organization excited behind it. And those are demonstrated wins that get, if you could maybe expand a little bit on what are some of the small, just say incremental changes that could have a somewhat big impact that come to mind.
Yeah. So I have a couple of examples. These are actually repetitive in my career that I've seen, and I've either been a part of introducing or I've been a recipient of as an employee at a company. So one that early on kind of strikes me, and I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but one of them is most, let's call it buildings that are over 10 years old now. When you think about the lighting that you have inside your facility, there's a lot of different styles. There's the incandescent, there's the large industrial bulbs that are in many of the older warehouses. A lot of times just changing those out to LED lighting, that one from an energy consumption, energy usage, it's ridiculously low. A lot of those projects actually pay for themselves in the first year. And in most projects in a company, ideally you're looking for a payback. Again, that's business economics. And that's where I think a lot of people have a conflict with sustainability, that they don't always see that there's a payback. And so therefore it seems like an endeavor with a cost without a return. But LED lighting is a very common one. I've seen, again, as I said, 10 years ago, we did this at a facility and it paid back, I want to say in about 3 or 4 months, just based on energy usage due to the size of the facility. But just most recently, I was working with a company called Hamilton Company, and we were just changing out the lights there. Again, it was an older facility, but it's something that we did just recently. It was a very little effort for a very, very big payback. Kind of moving up that ladder, one of the other, I'll call it, it's still considered a bit more of a capital investment, but on older facilities, a lot of times the HVAC systems that are on the roofs, they're pretty antiquated and their energy consumption is just through the roof. And a lot of times people don't want to change out HVAC. If it's working, it's servicing the building, you're happy, it looks like a cost. But when you look at the energy consumption behind that unit, again, in the same way, you can swap that out, have a payback in a year, get new units with better performance, which frankly, your employees benefit from that. You have better control over the entire system and the conditions, but they'll pay themselves back in a year, 2 years. And so you do get the ROI. You do get the reduced energy consumption, which again flows over into the sustainability side. So I would say those are maybe some small examples of kind of leaning into it. One other one I'll mention, and then we can kind of go into maybe some of the bigger projects, but early on in my career, we did something called an energy treasure hunt, Greg. And it's a fun way of basically saying we're going to do a structured process to go kind of around the facility and understand where are we leaking kind of from a utilities perspective. And, you take a small team, typically it could be like a technical team, but it doesn't have to. And sometimes individuals with that aren't coming from the shop floor are great because they have a new set of eyes and a new set of ears, and they hear things that we just are used to and we've toned out. And when you walk around your facility, you can hear air leaks. In fact, if you do it after hours when kind of the facility shut down on the weekend, you'll hear air leaks coming out a lot of the equipment. Well, that air leak means the compressor is running, and the compressor running is an incredible energy drain in the facility. You could also have old motors and systems that are out there where they're just not efficient motors. Again, a lot of your equipment might be from the 70s and 80s. Well, swapping out a motor, again, can have an immediate impact. Again, we already talked about lighting, but those are just a couple examples where just understanding where you might be bleeding can, again, hit you on the bottom line, and some small changes can actually improve your performance of your facility, reduce your energy usage. And again, it's all sustainability efforts that we don't think about.
For more of the Charles Aris Podcast and access to additional resources like compensation reports, blog articles, and newsletters, visit our resource hub at www.charlesaris.com/resources.
Excellent. Thank you. Jesse, let's break it down a little bit and talk about, the plot you hear and you see on television, plastics, these companies that are getting waste out of the ocean and plastic bottles. And that seems to be the taboo product of these days, anything plastic. Anything come to mind that you guys may have, in your previous roles, implemented around sustainability, around the, biodegradable. A lot of people don't even realize that there is such a thing as biodegradable plastics. And
yeah,
or can you speak to something around that, or maybe something around, reduction and reuse strategies?
Yeah, I think we can pause on that for a while. So I'll try to keep it brief. I would say from the bioplastics, my personal experience, I don't have it. I know they continue to be developed. They continue to come a long way. And I think in a lot of areas, the performance of those as we understand them has come to a point where we can start to incorporate them more into the products that we manufacture and the packaging methodologies. Again, I'm not as adept at that to be able to unpack it as maybe as much as I would like for this conversation. I can tell you there's a couple areas where we actually moved from plastics into something more on when you think from a pulp and paper product. We had a couple of products that were packaged in plastic containers and plastic reels in my early days at Brady. And we actually worked with our packaging supplier. I don't remember the SKU count, but we had, when you think of label manufacturing, there are limitless sizes of labels and quantities of labels and applications. And we actually worked with our packaging supplier to standardize on a corrugate box that actually could be used in a variety of our products based on just kind of form and cut factors. You can almost think of it as a transformer toy for the packaging industry. But what it did for us was we actually, when we went through the design, we tried to understand what some of our failures were in our product quality. So when you had something shipping in the field, if it had vibration or it wasn't packaged tightly enough, you would actually have kind of rolls that would unwind and delaminate. Well, what we were able to do with that redesign is actually fix some of that compactness and shifting of products as they went to the customer. So we improved the quality, but more importantly, we reduced the number of SKUs that we had to carry in our warehouse to package our products. And what that meant was, you think about it, just warehouse space that took up, the number of shipments of unique SKUs that had to come, the pallets. Then you think of the freight going all the way back through the supply chain, the trucking, and it explodes when you go backwards. And so that was just I would say, a very basic example of change to a standardized corrugate packaging that would allow flexibility for a variety of products. Just overall simplified the supply chain, the business, and had a positive impact on product quality. One other one that is very interesting, recently working with a product line that had a high SKU count with a long, I don't want to say legacy, but I would say it's a long-standing product line. And much of the product actually is manufactured out of a foam material and like a styrofoam with a corrugate sleeves. And we actually had a customer that was, again, from a sustainability perspective and the European regulations, was actually working to on their supply chain to improve it. And so we were approached to ask, how can we change this packaging and again, be compliant with both the European regulations? Well, in this case, it was actually from a client perspective that we started going back to our packaging manufacturer. And what we've discovered is we could actually reduce the cost of our packaging, reduce the volumetric requirements. I think we were able to reduce the SKU count, if I remember correctly. And we were able to fix some, let's say, legacy quality issues, those quality issues that had been, they were in the original design. We were able to kind of design some of that out. Again, it's a bit more of a Herculean effort to change your packaging across a large catalog of product. But again, it just goes to show that there's an opportunity everywhere. And in that case, we would have gone to a fiber-based packaging material. And so when you talk about the bottles in the ocean and the styrofoam going back into the landfills, this would have essentially eliminated that. And we would have ended up with a recyclable and or compostable material.
Excellent. So Jesse, it sounds as such that if a company wants to begin sustainability practice, regardless of whether it's plastic, packaging, or paper, number one, you need to assess your current impact and set some goals. Mm-hmm. It sounds like evaluate your current material usage. When you're talking about energy, evaluate, what's your waste generation, energy consumption, things, et cetera. And then, try to define what your current sustainability goals are. And then the next is to engage your stakeholders. I've heard a concept, forming a green team. Is that something that you participated in throughout your career?
No, I did not ever go into something structured and formal like that. And even kind of going back, Greg, you touched on something really good, which was, the idea of measuring or having a goal or a metric and kind of where you want to go. I think because this can feel like an elephant in the room, it's the same in your personal career in your life. When you write down a goal, you're more likely to go and achieve that goal. I think the same thing happens here, where if you start and you write down what you'd like to do over the next 6, 12, 18 months, and then you work as a business to go do that, you have a higher likelihood of moving the needle and making it a very real activity. And then I think what you're going to find is once momentum is gained and people start moving and you start seeing results, even better when you start seeing economic results, especially from a business perspective. But when you start seeing those will naturally start to gain momentum, and you'll be looking for more and more areas where you can bring it through. You talked about the idea of a green team. Most organizations, especially in the industrial manufacturing space, most companies have an environmental health and safety team, right? Where they've got they'll develop safety committees. They'll talk about what could be fixed in the facility and where could they improve a process or something that's going to make the facility safer and make for a better work environment. You could absolutely do the same thing from a green perspective. Get individuals engaged from across the organization. In our world and kind of where people are at today, there will absolutely be people excited to jump on board with that. So I would absolutely encourage it. And then the last part is celebrating your wins. It can be in business, you can get so focused on getting a result to get the result to get on to the next project that you don't pause and reflect on what you were able to succeed. And I think first and foremost is you should celebrate it. And that starts internally, advertising to the team that you have about what you've been able to accomplish as a group. One, just everybody knows employee morale and engagement does go up with that. And there's just a vested interest that the company cares and the company is engaged. But then turning that externally and sharing what you're doing. I'm a firm believer that I don't think you should share your sustainability goals because your customers require it. If you're only responding to the market because somebody else has done it, I think you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Ideally, you should be doing it because you know it's the right thing. And so again, and I truly believe that like anybody else, Greg, if I'm talking to you about something, if I start pontificating, you're quickly going to have the meter that says like, this just feels like positioning and it's not going to feel authentic. And at the end of the day, you really want to celebrate what you're happy and excited by. And so when you think about talking to your customers about what you're doing, you're going to find more and more websites have sustainability efforts and focuses and whole teams built around this. Making sure that the messaging of that from a marketing perspective is truly about the real reason is why you undertook it. And that authentic voice comes through. Again, if you start internally, that should naturally just propagate to externally and you'll be excited to share it. And then from there, you can start to include your customer base and the market will start to get more engaged. And at the end of the day, we shouldn't do it for this, but a lot of times you'll find that some customers will actually switch over due to the focus and the efforts on sustainability because they might have internal goals to use sustainable or environmentally conscious suppliers.
Awesome. Let's just as we wind down here, let's flip this a little bit to the consumer and talk about, as I as a consumer know and since we work in this sector, we know what we could do as consumers to support sustainability practices in our area. But other than, I know for us, make smart purchase decisions, choose products that with recycled content, look for products that are labeled 100% recyclable, whether it be plastic or what, opt for, eco-friendly packaging, just like you talked about, moving from a plastic to a fiber-based product. Another support companies that have sustainability practices and comments and things of that nature. But what else? Is there anything else from your side of the equation as a consumer that comes to mind as we wrap up?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Greg. First and foremost is, making kind of your preference known by the way that you shop, right? I think there's two parts to that. One of them is absolutely as a consumer making a conscious decision on where you're going to shop or what you're going to buy based on how something is packaged or what goes into it. We've all heard about the microplastics and you're seeing more of the metal containers and drinking containers kind of changing, and same thing with less water bottles by using reusable containers. However, I also think that at the end of the day, if you're the supplier and your volume goes down because your client base shifts away, but you don't necessarily audit that, there's a risk that you're not necessarily driving a change at the company level from the commercial supplier, whatever product. Without sounding to call your senator on this, I really do think if you have a passion around this and you're going through the effort to make a change in the way you buy something or the reason that you buy something, make it known by sending an email to the customer support line at the company of the product. I think if you start to hear as a company, if you start to hear your consumer telling you they wish you had a change in your materials, at some point, those customer-centric metrics are going to escalate that internally. And that if they're not doing it proactively, it will drive them to do it reactively, is what I truly believe. So I think there's an element of change your purchasing decisions, but also have your voice heard. And the last thing I would add is right now in our kind of our, let's call it our government changes from a topical perspective, we're talking about health a lot right now and making America a bit healthier. And there's a lot of individuals that have kind of talked about how do you change your healthy lifestyle in your home? Well, if you try to go wholesale and go 100% organic on everything, it's a rapid change in your life. And it's really hard, just like a diet, to maintain that. You can do it. And some people are very successful. Sometimes it starts at choose one ingredient and one product that you're consuming. And it could be, in my household, we're cutting out red dye 40. We recognize that there's actually some studies that show it's got some challenges in younger children. So we're making a conscious effort. It's one thing. And so in the same way in your lifestyle and your health, you would start small and kind of work your way into and make it a habit. I'd say the same thing carries through on your purchasing decisions. Start in one area, start with one thing, and then start to scale from there. That way it doesn't feel like your life is completely disrupted. But there's that kind of that saying, be 1% better every day. And when you kind of look back over a year, it's been a significant change. I say the same thing carries through here. Make a start.
I related to the wonderful comment and I've preached it throughout my career, the Sam Walton approach. Don't do one thing 1,000% better, do 1,000 things 1% better.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, Jesse, I think this has been a really informative session. Appreciate your input, and I hope that our audience gains, if you gain one nugget from this, then mission accomplished. So thank you for your time today, and I think we'll, for now, sign off.
Thanks, Greg. Great conversation.